Hey guys, how's it going? So this weekend is UFC Fight Night Emmett versus Murphy, and I'm just going to break down the card and give you all my picks and predictions. Not an amazing event, so kind of hard to pick for this one, but let's just jump straight into it. Starting off the card and opening the prelims, it's Vanessa Demopoulos versus Talita Alencar. Now Demopoulos is coming off a first round submission loss to Amarim where she looked pretty bad. It was a pretty underwhelming performance, that one. Outside of that, she constantly just goes to these really close decisions and will often just get edged out by more well-rounded fighters such as your, Kavakavich's. She will win a few, but those are against sort of less professional fighters, and she's just alright everywhere. She isn't amazing in any specific area. Her biggest strength is sort of her grit to last to the later rounds and be able to put up a fight in those later rounds. Talita Alencar, she drew and then proceeded to lose to Stephanie Luciano, who at the time was very impressive, but in the future Luciano lost to Sam Hughes, and that wasn't a very good performance, so I don't really rate Luciano that much as an opponent. Outside of that, she had a very close decision win over Ryan dos Santos, and that was sort of very, very close, and she did get outstruck badly on the feet in that one. Overall, I think she's decent on the ground, but lacks the adequate striking to make a real impact in a fight like this, and I think Demopoulos is just going to have her taken in the striking, so I'm going to go with Demopoulos by a decision win. Next up on the card, we have Victor Henry versus Pedro Falcao. So Victor Henry, very, very good striker, and he always throws high volume. He sort of puts the pressure on his opponents and wears them down as the fight goes on. Sometimes he'll find a finish, like in the case with Rani Yahya, but not always, and mainly because he has a lot of flaws in his grappling game and will often get taken down, making his fights a lot closer than they sort of have to be if he had better takedown defense. In the case of that Tony Gravely fight, he was winning on the feet, but Gravely's wrestling was just sort of carrying it to a very, very close decision, which he just edged out. And hell, even Charles Jourdain, when they fought, he was using his grappling a lot more than we usually see Jourdain use, and he actually submitted Henry in that fight, so that's a little bit concerning, especially against someone like Pedro Falcao. Speaking of Falcao, only one fight in the UFC against Victor Hugo where he let the fight run away from him, sort of in those later rounds where he started getting outstruck on the feet. However, he did find some success in that first round through his wrestling, but in this fight he did shoot 13 takedowns, only landed one, so while it was good wrestling, very hard to even get it to the ground. Really, I think this depends on how well Falcao can utilise his ground game, but I think more likely than not, Victor Henry will take this one just based off his striking, and yeah, so I'm going to predict this one Victor Henry by decision win. Next up on the card is Loma Lookboonmee versus Istela Nunes. Now, Lookboonmee is very, very, very good at striking. She's very underrated in the strawweight division, and I don't know how she hasn't got high ranked opponents. She's on a 3-fight win streak, with all 3 of those wins being incredibly dominant, and her second last opponent she submitted, showing not only is she incredibly dangerous on the feet, she's also incredible on the ground as well. Against Brito Brazil, she showed high level Muay Thai level striking, very good grappling, very well-rounded fighter, and I think her biggest strength in this fight will be sort of her clinch ability. She'll definitely outland on the feet, and I think she can hold her own decently on the ground, if not present a threat on the ground. Istela Nunes, originally she was set to fight Molly McCann, which I think the UFC was sort of setting her up for a win before Molly retired. So I think that one was supposed to be a bit of a layout for McCann. Nunes is on a 4-fight losing streak and hasn't won a single fight within the UFC. Granted, these were against pretty decent opponents like Yasmin Uregui and Dudakova, but in all her fights she just gets put away very, very early or just gets dominated. And these are by people that aren't really known as finishers, such as Dudakova. That fight was really bad. Overall, I think she's just a bit too chinny, and against a fighter like Lookboonmee, that can get her put away very, very quickly. Very dangerous. So for that reason, I'm going to say that Loma Lookboonmee is going to get this one done by a round 1 KO. Moving on, we have Rhys Mckee versus Daniel Frunza. Now, Mckee has had a very, very unfortunate run in the UFC. His first ever fight within the UFC was against Khamzat Chimaev, where he got finished very quickly in the first. After that, he fought Alex Morono, which he ended up losing, and then they ended up cutting him, where he moved back to Cage Warriors. In Cage Warriors, he won his next 3 fights, and it was looking good again. Then he got re-signed to the UFC and then just lost his next 2 fights, and it seems like he's a fighter that struggles to sort of transfer to the higher skill level of the UFC. It's sort of like the skill ceiling. as being what's been holding him down, and he always gets outclassed. Daniel Frunza, he's coming off a really good win and a finish on the Contender Series. He has some real power in his hands, with every shot in this Contender Series fight dealing some real damage, and he eventually put his opponent down and finished him. He does have a habit of letting himself get hit though in exchange for landing these shots, but I can't see Mckee landing anything powerful enough to finish him, so for that reason I'm going to go with Daniel Frunza by around 2 KO. Next up on the card we have Dione Belbita versus Dione Barbosa. So Belbita is a very well-rounded fighter, and she will cater to most of her opponent's skill sets, where she'll outstrike a lot of grapplers and then sort of out-wrestle any pure strikers. Where she struggles the most though is when she's fighting more well-rounded opponents, where her lack of proficiency in any particular area results in her being outperformed in a specific area, either striking or wrestling. Like in the case of Molly McCann, she didn't look amazing, and then she very easily got taken down and submitted within the first. Dione Barbosa, decent on the feet, however she does land significantly less strikes than her opponents, and that occurred in both her UFC bouts. Where she does thrive though the most is on the ground. She's really good at BJJ and has the ability to sort of create these submission openings. However, in her matchup against an opponent that's able to deal with this grappling, she does struggle, and she will return to the feet and then get outstruck, like the case with Miranda Maverick. But I don't see Belbita being able to put as much of a good fight on Barbosa as her previous opponents. I think Barbosa is just too well-rounded for Belbita, and for that reason I'm going to say that Barbosa is going to get this one done by a decision win. Next up on the card is Davey Grant versus Daniel Santos. Now Davey Grant, he's coming off a very dominant win over Ramon Tavares, where he looked amazing. He dominated on the feet and he outstruck his way to victory very convincingly. Before that, his fight with Alencar, he did look a lot closer to losing. He did get taken down 5 times within that fight and was getting beat on the ground pretty convincingly. However, in the third he did turn around and get submission, but before that he just wasn't looking amazing on the ground, and I think that's his biggest weakness. Daniel Santos, coming off a very long layoff with his last fight against Johnny Munoz taking place in June of 2023, so that's almost 2 whole years. However, in his last fight he was very dominant, both on the feet and on the ground. He landed more than Munoz, and his takedown and ground game was significantly better. His fight before that was against John Castaneda, and that was a little bit closer, but the finish in the second round made him look very dangerous. And overall, I think Davey will definitely come out way stronger on the feet, but I think Santos' grappling will be far too much for Grant. I think he's going to get this one done. I think Daniel Santos by a decision win. And closing out the prelims, we have Osbourne versus Luis Gurule. So Osbourne, he had a very memorable fight at the Sphere with Ronaldo Rodriguez. That one did get very close, but I think he did lose the decision primarily due to Rodriguez's superior wrestling and sort of grappling. Outside that, his record is really bad within the UFC, and he lost 2 fights before that to submissions, where even before he got finished he was just getting dominated. Overall, I just don't rate him that highly as a fighter, and I think the flaws in his ground game are glaring, and his striking isn't really anything to be praised highly either. Luis Gurule had a very close split decision win on the Contender Series, where he looked decent, but he didn't really show anything that separated him from the other fighters. While we don't really know how good his ground game is, I don't think it matters in this fight. As long as his striking is better than Osbourne, which I don't think is too hard, I think he'll win. So I'm going to have this one Luis Gurule by a decision win. Opening up the main card, we have Torrez Finney versus Robert Valentin. So Torrez Finney, he has an undefeated record. He looked really good in his most recent Contender Series performance, where he picked up his opponent, dropped him, and finished him off with vicious ground and pound in the first round. He looked much improved from his previous fight, where he sort of got chastised for not really pushing the pace, and he didn't look amazing in that first fight. Second fight, he looked incredible. And his main thing is he'll just use his power in the feet to push you back, take you down, and then finish you with punches from top. Robert Valentin, he had a lot of hype behind him on Tough. His quarterfinals performance, he got a 20-second KO, which looked incredible. And then in the semi-finals, he got a first-round armbar, which showed some grappling proficiency as well. And going into his fight with Ryan Loader, I thought it was going to be done for. I thought Valentin was going to dominate. Loader actually ended up winning that one, and Valentin looked really bad in that fight. He was getting dominated the whole fight, and even on the feet he was sort of getting outstruck, and on the ground it was domination, with Loader eventually finishing the fight through ground and pound, which I didn't expect because Loader's a grappler. Anyway, I think Finney will just be a lot better on the feet, and if he ends up taking Valentin down, we'll see with Loader, Valentin has no answer. Finney will get top position and just rain down ground and pound, and will probably end the fight very quickly if that happens. So for that reason, I'm going to pick Torrez Finney with a round 2 KO. Next up is Brad Tavares versus Gerald Meerschaert. The gatekeepers collide. Brad Tavares is a very competent striker who will constantly sort of pressure his opponent with high volume throughout the fight. He doesn't really have a finishing ability though, and most of his fights do come from decision wins. Sometimes they're very, very close as well. And we've seen a major flaw in his grappling game, and in his last 2 fights, it's caused him to sort of lose these close split decisions, especially one against Jung Young Park. That was a split decision. He lost that because Jung Young just out-wrestled him. Even Gregory Rodriguez threw in a few takedowns when they fought, which is quite unlike him because Rodriguez is sort of a pure striker. He'll do it if necessary, but he's known for his striking. Won that fight probably through grappling. Gerald Meerschaert, very well rounded, with his biggest asset being his grappling. He has some really good submission wins over names like Edmund Shabazian and Andrei Petroski, which are by no means slouch opponents. And he has the most submission wins in UFC middleweight history, which is, just think about that, that's crazy. I think that is really, really dangerous for someone like Brad Tavares, who's sort of a one-dimensional striker. And I think this fight, Meerschaert will get pieced up on the feet, no doubt about it, but the minute the fight goes to the ground, I think Meerschaert will find a submission and take it. And so for that reason, I'm going to go with Gerald Meerschaert by a round 2 submission. Next up, we have Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Martin Buday. So Nzechukwu, incredibly active fighter. He usually fights 2 to 3 times a year, which I think will be his biggest advantage in this fight. He never really loses the skill set, and he never becomes stagnant. He always mixes it up. Coming off a really good first round TKO over Lucas Brzeski, and before that he had a really weird finish over Chris Barnett where Barnett sort of injured himself on the walkout. But either way, dominating that fight before the stoppage. He did have a close split decision loss to Oven St. Peru before that, but I think the fight was very close and his power was really good there. And I just think he has too much power for a fight like this to sort of get dominated. Martin Buday, coming off some unimpressive performances with a split decision winner over Arlovsky, who was pretty much out the door at that point. Before that, he got beat up by Sheen Milgaziv and finished quite badly, and overall I do think he is a decent striker. Nzechukwu is just better and possesses more power, and it's evident. Buday couldn't finish Lucas Brzeski, Nzechukwu could, so for that reason I'm going to say that Kennedy Nzechukwu is going to win this one by round 1 KO. Up next is Cortavius Romeus versus Chang Ho Lee. So Romeus, he got into the UFC off a pretty boring Contender Series fight where he took a decision, but he didn't really look that amazing. And then he lost his first fight to Gaston Bolaños, who is a really good fighter, and I think it's a really unlucky first opponent to get. But in this fight, he just got dominated in a one-way beating. He found some success in the grappling, but it wasn't like he was proficient in the grappling. It was more just a reprieve from the punching that was going on from Bolaños, and he just got outstruck. Chang Ho Lee, only one fight within the UFC, which was a very, very, very close split decision where the striking and grappling were pretty much equal between both fighters. He just showed slightly better in each, and I don't think he showed anything that promising. I do think he is better than Romeus though, and I think he'll most likely take this one to a close decision. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Chang Ho Lee by a decision win. Another co-main event, Pat Sabatini versus Joanderson Brito. So Pat Sabatini, very dangerous grappler, and most of his good wins come via submission, and most recently his performance over Jonathan Pierce showed that. He got the back of a standing Jonathan Pierce and sunk in this rear naked choke, submitted him. However, there is more to be desired in his striking, with him being out-volumed in most of his fights, where he'll either find a submission or if he doesn't, he'll lose. And his chin's been cracked a few times in his fights. Diego Lopez did it, which I'll give him a pass. It's Diego Lopez, he has pretty good power. But of all people, Damon Jackson finished him, and I think he finished him very early, if not in the first. Which, I mean, if you're getting finished by Damon Jackson, you either have a really bad chin or you need to work on your striking, because that just shouldn't be happening. Joanderson Brito fought Diego Lopez on the Contender Series, and he looked very good in that fight. He put up a very close fight and actually beat Lopez, handing him one of his few losses. But that was very early in Lopez's career. Lopez didn't look as good as he did now, and I don't think that's indicative of his overall skill. Outside of that, he has some really impressive looking performances, especially in the striking, where he seems to have some very decent power and also some finishing ability. He's also capable on the ground, has some good grappling and a few submission wins. He also submitted Jonathan Pierce, so that's not really great for Pat Sabatini. Overall, I just think he's more well-rounded. Pat Sabatini's a bit one-dimensional, relying a bit heavily on his grappling, and I think in this fight, Brito will just be too much to handle. I have this one going to Joanderson Brito by around 2 KO. And now the main event, Josh Emmett takes on Lerone Murphy. So Josh Emmett, he has some insane power in his hands. I don't need to say that, we all know it. Especially the overhand, which he's demonstrated with that nasty knockout over Bryce Mitchell, put Bryce Mitchell out. Actually had Mitchell seizing on the floor. One of the few moments where I've been like, oh shit, while watching like a UFC fight. He struggles in high volume fighters though. He struggled with Topuria, he struggled with Rodriguez, and he just sort of let himself get beat up in the following rounds. In that Topuria fight, he got 10-7'd. So there is that concern, and then also he isn't great on the ground, and we rarely see that because he doesn't really get taken down as much, but when he is on the ground, he will often just give up positions, and he got submitted in the case of Yair Rodriguez. Lerone Murphy consistently wins decisions through throwing just way more volume than his opponents. It's a common trend, he just throws and just throws in volume. He landed almost 2.5 times that of Barbosa when they fought, and this is Edson Barbosa. This is a guy who is just a pure striker, and Murphy landed 2.5 times what Barbosa did. He had a bit of a closer fight with Dan Ige, but that's just because of the grappling, and he also did demonstrate a lot of his grappling proficiency in that fight. I think that Murphy's just going to be too much for Emmett in this fight with his volume, and Emmett's kryptonite is volume fighters, so I think it will likely be a win with him picking up the later rounds, and yeah, so I'm going to go with Lerone Murphy by decision win for this one. So that's it guys, those are all my predictions for UFC Fight Night Emmett versus Murphy. I tried to keep this one brief because I'm still trying to recover from whatever I have right now. You know the drill on the screen right now, my picks, Cameron's picks all lined up. Easy. Yeah, I'm worried about that main prediction pick. I do feel like Emmett could just come out and finish Murphy, but screw it, I've already locked it in. Yeah, see you in the next one, UFC 314 next, so very excited for that one. Bye bye.